아, 너로 받는 것보다 쉬운데요?
Drug crime, political intrigue, judicial moths, the final killing game of three dark forces, who will have the last laugh. Let's take a look at this film, that has become the box office king of South Korea, in the first half of 2025, and was also selected as the annual Asian film, at the 27th Shanghai International Film Festival. It's worth noting that even the sweet-smiling Kang Han-ul has stepped out of his warm-hearted guy comfort zone, to become a ruthless and resolute snitch. What reason do you have not to press the play button? The arrested man desperately broke free and came to the water dispenser, but was stopped when he tried to drink. At first, the man resisted fiercely, but the other person actually picked up a slipper. After a while, John, the external aid sought by the prosecutor, walked in holding a Coke. The man who got the Coke gulped it down, in the blink of an eye. Now the problem of thirst was solved. John weighed the drugs in the man's hand and found that the total weight was as much as half a kilogram, saying that this would lead to many years in prison. But John could make a deal with the man, offering a price he couldn't refuse, and reducing his prison term by 1/3. Finally, he successfully obtained the information of the person who bought the drugs. Then John went to his drug addict friend, and asked him to pretend to be a flash delivery guy. The next day, the guy successfully delivered the goods safely. After checking everything was okay, the people who received the goods prepared to leave, but a car in front suddenly reversed and crashed into them, and a female driver got out, saying she wanted to talk about compensation. The young man in the driver's seat was about to get out, but the man in the passenger seat said something was wrong. After looking around, he suddenly shouted to leave right away. The ambushers hiding in the dark quickly attacked. Where had these young people seen such a scene? Out of nowhere, a group of people rushed out smashing and beating. Their postures seemed to want them to confess here. It took them a long time to break through the crowd, but they were violently forced to stop by John not far away. Finally, the prosecutors successfully took these drug addicts back to the police station. Such violent behavior, this is John's daily work. In South Korea, there are three types of people who deal with drugs: those who buy and sell drugs, prosecutors who catch drug addicts, and those who don't play by the rules like John. Many similar cases in South Korea were carefully planned by him, aiming to help the people behind him make contributions. After completing the task, John left the police station smartly. But 3 years ago, John was just an honest taxi driver. That night, he successfully delivered a passenger to the designated location. The other person generously gave a lot of tips, asked him to wait a few minutes, and thoughtfully took out 2 bottles of drinks. He opened one and drank it, motioning John to drink. John didn't think much and drank it, checked the high tip countless times, and was too excited to speak. But soon he found something wrong. Before he could figure out what was going on, he was handcuffed by the police. He was imprisoned on the charge of drug use, and met the roommates he would live with for many years. This group of roommates was very friendly. In the days that followed, the honest John was bullied every day, and this kind of life would continue for many more years, until the appearance of Prosecutor George. There are many prosecutors in South Korea, but only 1% can become the elite. To have the last laugh, one needs to make achievements. So George found John and discovered that in his confession, John said he was framed. He wasn't a junkie at all, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that John had a good memory. A simple test checked this. George then wanted him to be his snitch. That is, a snitch. It turned out that many junkies, even though they were in prison, still had their ways to get drugs. George wanted John to help solve this problem, and in return, John would be exonerated if the task was completed. The opportunity to prove himself was now. After going back to his cell, John picked a fight with the prison bully right away. Although he was quickly beaten beyond recognition, he managed to prove himself and successfully infiltrate the drug trafficking network. He collected intelligence, drew a connection diagram between these people, helped George solve the problem, and successfully got a promotion opportunity. But there was still a long way to go to become one of the 1%. In the evening, George treated John to dinner, and asked him what he wanted to do in the future. The other person actually didn't know either. George then asked if he would be willing to continue being a snitch, using the identity of a junkie to infiltrate the drug organization network, and help him gather intelligence. John actually trusted him a lot and agreed without hesitation. After that, he relied on being a snitch to dig up intelligence for George. One made a fortune, and the other rose step by step. At the same time, Drug Enforcement Captain Bob was also working hard to arrest junkies, but the identity of the criminal this time was really special. It was a fairly famous female celebrity, but no matter what was asked, she only knew how to cry, in order to make her confess the drug trafficking den behind it. Bob promised that, if she could help solve the case and atone for her crimes, he would do his best to get her exempted from imprisonment. If she didn't agree, he would call the reporters, and she should become famous overnight because of this matter. But John had also set his sights on the organization behind the female celebrity at this time. Charlie, the boss of the drug factory, had just rectified the organization's atmosphere, and then drove away from the factory. But soon after leaving, he received a call from John, who reminded him that there were police behind, and offered to help lure them away, then meet at the designated place. Charlie still trusted John quite a bit, so he told the driver to head straight for the target destination. He had no idea that there was a surprise arranged by John there. At this time, Bob in the rear was completely dumbfounded. How could he have known that John was George's snitch? He just thought the other person was crazy, cursed, and then went after them. Everything was under John's control. He called Charlie, and told him to follow the escape route he had arranged. But not long after running, he was surrounded by Bob and his men. Charlie had to punch to get glass shards, and warned Bob not to come closer, otherwise he would commit suicide on the spot. When both sides were deadlocked, John leisurely got on the elevator leaving the subway station. 2.5 seconds later, when Bob saw someone cutting in on the case, he stepped forward to question George, but the other person didn't take him seriously and turned away. When the elevator door opened, John greeted Bob. Only then did Bob realize he had been tricked. John was actually George's snitch. Then George led his men into the car. Charlie almost exploded with anger when he saw John. After all, being betrayed by someone you trust was truly heartbreaking, but there was nothing he could do. Bob called the female celebrity. Although the manufacturers had been taken down, the buyers were still causing trouble outside, so after getting the location provided by the female celebrity, Bob led his men to make the arrest right away. Just as the female celebrity was about to leave, someone suddenly knocked on her car window. The man asked her to go in and join the fun. The female celebrity hurriedly said she wasn't feeling well today, but the other person pointed to a man in blue at the hotel entrance, saying that this man often helped his father. Whether she wanted to or not, she had to go. A few minutes later, John brought Charlie to the hotel ahead of others. It seemed he had used both threats and inducements to get information from Charlie, finding the right place one step ahead of Bob. Then John and George checked the situation and went into the hotel. Coincidentally, a rave party was being held there. They blended in with the crowd without being noticed. No one realized they were there to make arrests, and what followed was the hunting hour. Going into any restroom could take away several drug addicts. Going into the guest rooms needed no further explanation. Drug addicts appeared in groups, among whom was the female celebrity forced to come in. George was ready to arrest everyone, but James, who organized the party, chose to ignore him. It seemed he had a powerful backstage. Bob arrived just as most people had been arrested. He was so angry that he cursed wildly, vowing that he knew about the collusion between John and George, and would definitely bring them to justice. As he spoke, he tried to rush in to find George, but was blocked and couldn't walk in at all. A familiar voice caught the female celebrity's attention, and she kept looking back, hoping Bob would save her, but the other person didn't notice her at all. At this point, George, who had successfully completed the task, came out. Bob wanted to settle accounts with him, but couldn't even get close, only able to watch as his car drove out of sight. He thought this matter was finally over. John rolled down the window, told Bob not to make things too difficult, then left with a mocking smile. Late at night, James appeared in George's secret room. He lay on the bed playing with his phone, looking indifferent. James hadn't been caught red-handed at that time. He held the party to use this thing to control political and business elites, helping his father gain more support. Now he needed someone to help launder dirty money. This statement hit George right in the heart. He had always been ambitious to climb the career ladder. With a ready-made opportunity before him, he agreed without hesitation. But now that he had followers, those from the past needed to be cleaned up. No one who knew his past secrets could be allowed to stay, so he called Charlie to his presence. At this point, John was on his way home. Then Charlie broke one of John's legs. Seeing that John had completely lost the strength to resist, he got a large amount of drugs for him. After all, George had already given the order. Charlie, who had long wanted to kill John, now completely let go of all constraints, and spilled gasoline on John's leg. Meanwhile, George had no intention of letting Bob go. After all, if this guy remained in office, he might have a negative impact on Prince James, so he decisively framed Bob and staged a play. First, he got the media to report on the female celebrity's drug involvement, then used her statement to confront Bob, accusing him of maintaining Snitch. He quickly brought the other person down from his position. John couldn't believe George was so heartless. In order to seek revenge, he locked himself in a small room. Every time he couldn't hold back, even if he vomited severely. Despite the severe injury on his leg, he forced himself to endure it with strong willpower, exercising furiously day and night. And all of this was thanks to the help of his friends. A year later, his friend brought drugs to test the results. John, who had endured for a long time, immediately snatched the things away and stared at them nervously. After looking for a while, he angrily threw the things away. It seemed he had quit, only the injury on his leg had not recovered. and he still needed to make countless efforts to walk normally like before. On the other side, after investigation, the judge determined that Bob was wronged, so he was released. Bob, who had been released from prison, could finally reunite with his family. Just as he was about to go home, he was stopped by a reporter. The other person said they wanted to talk about the arrest of drug addicts at the hotel a year ago. But Bob no longer wanted to care about these things, so he turned away with his family. At the same time, George had become a famous chief prosecutor. With less than a month left before the presidential election, each candidate was trying every means to canvass votes. George took a quick look and left, then came to James and asked what orders he had. Now he was a lackey of the other person, and also a knife to clear obstacles. James said a reporter was actually looking into the matter from a year ago. He didn't want this to affect his father's election. George listened and said he knew what to do. The female celebrity had also been released from prison, but the events of a year ago had completely destroyed her, so she could only deal in the drug business to survive. One day, when she delivered goods to a customer's door, she noticed something was wrong right away. The other person's arm was actually different from the picture posted online. She immediately realized there was a trap. Then the female celebrity grabbed her things and took off running, but was knocked out by John, who was blocking the way outside. Shortly after, John found Bob again, still flashing a crafty smile at him. Furious, Bob rushed up to him in a flash and knocked him to the ground with several punches. John naturally wouldn't stand for it. After all, he'd been training hard for a whole year and was just looking for someone to practice on, but he still couldn't match Bob. Just as he was about to be beaten to death, the female celebrity suddenly stopped Bob. The group then found a quiet place. Seeing the female celebrity's scarred arms, Bob asked why she was still a drug addict. She replied that thanks to Bob, she'd met drug dealers during her imprisonment. Now she could only muddle through each day. As they spoke, John suddenly walked out, lifted his pants to show Bob his leg. He said George had not only had him drugged, but also set fire to his leg, so George and James were their common enemies. So he proposed the three of them form an Avengers alliance. But George thought John's idea was unrealistic. John said not to worry about that. The day he went to the hotel a year ago, he'd deliberately kept a trick up his sleeve, hiding a micro-camera in his sunglasses. With that video, they could prove George had covered for James. But on the day he was set on fire, Charlie had taken the sunglasses. Charlie now ran a mobile phone export business in Japan, leaving drug production to Mary. Although Charlie remained in power, he only came back occasionally. If they caused trouble, they could definitely lure Charlie out. The female celebrity also mentioned there was a party on Saturday, with the same members as a year ago. She'd received an invitation and would seize the opportunity to film James' criminal evidence. John then proposed that he and Bob divide the work. One would handle Mary, the other George. As they spoke, John's friend walked in, but upon seeing Bob, he pretended to have went into the wrong room right away and left. Bob didn't understand why John was hanging out with a drug addict. John was too lazy to answer, only saying, "Let's act now." Then John and Bob found Mary, who was butchering fish at the market. Sensing trouble, she tried to flee but was immediately caught by Bob. She was surprisingly honest. That night, the female celebrity and Bob went to a phone store, cut a hole in her bag, and hid a phone in the interlayer, waiting for the party to put it to use. Worried about her safety, Bob told her to contact him if she got into trouble, but he'd said the same thing a year ago, and she'd still been arrested in the end. The next day, everyone acted separately. Following the intelligence from Mary, John sneaked onto the drug transport vehicle and found a large box hidden under the eels. Just as he was about to take it quietly, he found it was incredibly heavy, and the car alarm suddenly went off. Seeing the couriers running out, Bob quickly told John to hide. Thankfully, they didn't suspect anything and opened the car door for Charlie, who had just arrived. John and Bob sprang into action right away. While Charlie was eating in a restaurant, John took a chainsaw and started cutting into the eel truck, unaware Charlie was enjoying his meal when Bob suddenly appeared to give him a surprise. Charlie's lackey tried to sneak attack but was knocked to the ground. Others rushed up and grappled with Bob, but these lackeys were quite difficult to deal with. Bob simply couldn't break free for a while. Sensing something was wrong, Charlie fled in a hurry. He had intended to get into a car, but inadvertently caught sight of the drug-carrying vehicle leaking, so he hurried to check the situation and, finding John sawing the box, quickly stepped in to stop him. John was caught off guard right away, but luckily, a year of training wasn't in vain. He quickly counterattacked and firmly locked the other's neck with a chain. On the other side, the female celebrity prepared to go to the appointment. Just as she was about to board the yacht, she was stopped by security. Luckily, the other person only took out the spare phone from her bag. By now, Charlie had woken up from his coma. but his position was too awkward. If he didn't speak nicely, his neck would be violently squeezed, so he finally had to hand over the things. John and the others checked the video, believing they were one step closer to successful revenge. They then drove to the police station and handed over both the drugs and Charlie to the police. That night, the female celebrity made smooth progress, successfully sending out the video and signaling John's friend to act. Upon receiving the message, the other person made a tip-off call right away. At the same time, George was still proudly looking at his work, watching the framed female reporter in the news defending herself. He thought this trick was really effective, but was informed that someone had reported James. George panicked immediately and hurriedly called James. Upon learning someone had reported him, the first person he thought of was the female celebrity. After all, the way she looked at him was clearly filled with hatred. But there were too many people who had grudges against him, and he had no evidence to prove she did it. By now, George had discovered through investigation the collaboration of John's trio. He tried to inform James that the female celebrity was behind it, but the other person actually hung up. Perhaps James thought the female celebrity had already been dragged into hell and posed no threat, so he let her go. The female celebrity was so scared that her heart almost jumped out of her chest. After breaking free, she quickly got into the car, excitedly celebrating their great victory and making a video call to John while speaking. Seeing the video screen suddenly go black, Bob anxiously shouted her name, unaware that she had already been silenced. When John and Bob arrived, they found their friend's car engulfed in flames. The person inside had long been burned to a crisp. The two immediately broke down into uncontrollable sobs. They ran to the riverbank, depressed and complaining about the darkness of the society they lived in. Bob thought about how he hadn't been able to save the female celebrity a year ago. Now she was gone before he could even apologize. He shouted that he must avenge her, but catching the murderer was easier said than done. At this point, James was enjoying dinner in a high-end restaurant. Seeing George approach, he angrily berated him for his incompetence. George also hadn't expected John to cause so much trouble. If he had known, he would have killed him a year ago, but it wasn't too late yet. Just then, John called him. Then George went to the appointed place. The person he had once trusted most had betrayed him. Seeing each other again after a year, John had expected George to give an explanation, but there was no trace of emotion in the other's eyes.
우리 다음에 볼 때는 지옥에서 봅시다.
The next day, John gave Mary a large sum of money, hoping she could help arrange a ship to China. They wanted to give the video that could bring down George to a reporter, then flee to another country to make sure their safety. But as soon as they left, Mary called George, saying she had had her eye on a position for a long time, and would tell him where John had gone if her request was granted. After George agreed, Mary confessed that John and Bob had gone to the election canvassing site to give the materials to a female reporter. Upon hearing this, George led men to surround the site right away, and arrested them before Bob could succeed. But John was nowhere to be seen, and what Bob held was just a copy. James found his affairs exposed in the news, and feared it would affect his father's election. He waited for George to handle it, and George successfully took over the drug case involving James. The next day, as a trending figure, James was bombarded with tough questions from reporters. As soon as he got out of the car, they asked his opinion on being called a drug addict. James only smiled without speaking, but his eyes were filled with murderous intent. But he couldn't make a scene now, so he had to obediently go for a urine test. The guard looked upright and impartial, making James think something had gone wrong, and he would be finished this time. Unexpectedly, the guard handed over pre-prepared urine. On the other side, George hoped Bob would reveal where John was hiding, but after questioning for a long time, Bob remained silent. George took out surveillance videos of Bob's family right away. Naturally, Bob didn't want his family harmed, so he obediently handed over the address. After getting the address, George told his men right away that John didn't need to be brought back, but the materials must be got back at all costs. After finishing, George met James and told him everything was under control. As he spoke, he received many political and business elites. They sat together enjoying a grand meal without worry, and turned on the TV to watch James' father's debate live, in front of the whole nation. He said that if his son's drug use was proven, he would withdraw from the presidential race. He thought this would regain public favor, but the host suddenly interrupted. At the same time, Charlie came out with his henchmen to handle business. Then Mary came out with her men, clearly wanting to become the top leader. Although Charlie fought fiercely, the other side had many people, and eventually Charlie died by Mary's knife. On the other side, the scene of George and James' meeting actually appeared on live broadcast. The conversation between the two was clearly played out, and broadcast in real time. James and the others in front of the TV were immediately dumbfounded, and hurriedly looked back to check the situation. They found that there was actually a camera set up on the opposite building, and the man behind the camera was none other than John. The business elites who came to celebrate were so frightened that they quickly drew the curtains. Watching such a funny scene, John made an international friendly gesture to George. When everyone in the room had run away, George angrily rummaged through the room. He wanted to know where the recording device was hidden, and finally fixed his eyes on the lighter. It turned out that everything had been in his plan, since the moment John found Mary. First, he put the recording device into a lighter, of the same model as George's, gave it to Bob, and asked him to take the copied video to the election site. Then he asked Mary to inform George, and ask why she would obediently follow orders. Whether George fell or not had nothing to do with her. What was important was, that she could use the other person to solve Charlie. Then Bob was successfully taken away by George, after handing over John's address. It was the moment when George let down his guard. Bob then asked him for the lighter. Now George had also guessed everything, and rushed to the roof of the opposite building in anger, to stop John. The next day, James' father still tried to defend himself, but was pelted with rotten eggs all over. After all, no one is a fool. At this time, Bob, who had been reinstated, found James and warned him to surrender obediently, but James said he was a Superman, then jumped off the building to end his life. The film ends here. Korean crime films have their own system. They are relatively mature in terms of audio-visual effects and scripts. The rhythm is also well controlled. The final ending is satisfying. George, played by Hae Jin-woo, is really outstanding, climbing to a high position from the bottom by insidious means. He acts sinister and vicious. He fully demonstrates the character's dark cunning, ambition, and endless calculations in his eyes. In terms of theme, it still satirizes and criticizes social phenomena. When the truth is distorted by interests and power, random frame-ups and silencing by murder become the norm, tearing apart the corrupt inner core of South Korea's power system. If you like my channel, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.